Hello there, everybody. A wonderful good afternoon, good morning, or good evening from wherever you are connecting from. Hello and hi, everybody. I see some people are connecting from LinkedIn, other people are connecting from Facebook. Hi, everybody. Join me today in a conversation with Brett Parry, connecting from the US, and Jill Sheldekar, connecting from India. Both are connecting from two countries where they are not originally from. Both are virtual trainers, facilitators, and experts when it comes to virtual training and virtual coaching. So please join me. I'm really happy to see you. I see people connecting with a hi from Barcelona. Hello there, Anna. Great to have you with us. And I also see now coming in on my other device the comments from Facebook. Great to have you with us. Hello there. So my name is Barbara Covarrubias Venegas. I'm really happy to have you here with our first Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live. And Virtual Space Hero is a platform for virtual enthusiasts or to-bes, and we are creating a community to exchange about topics that concern the virtual space, whether it's virtual training, the virtual classroom, whether it's virtual leading or virtual collaborating. There's lots of information on our platform, and through these LinkedIn Lives, we are now going to foster also the discussion on this platform. Thank you very much. Hello, I see people from Serbia, Germany, from France, Paris connecting. Really, really great. Super excited. What can I say? Virtual Space Hero is a platform, as you might imagine, that, as many other things, were created in a very quick way during the past last month. I've been working as a virtual professor or virtual trainer, virtual consultant for many years, but through the dynamics of the past month, there was so much going on, and Virtual Space Hero took like a lot of speed, and the platform is here now. And I'm really happy also to have the approval for those LinkedIn Lives. But let me not waste too much time on the intro here, because I'm really super excited to have two great colleagues with me that experienced, as I did, quite a lot of requests in the past weeks, because we have been working for many years online already. And what I want to do is today we're going to discuss the good, the bad, but also the differences between in-presence trainings, coachings. Let's also take into consideration the virtual classroom and what are the challenges as well. So I'm really, really very, very happy to welcome here with me, and I'm adding her now. I'm opening the virtual doors to Jill Sheldekar, who is connecting from India. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks for having me today.
Hi, Jill.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm excited to start our conversation about working, facilitating, coaching, and training in the virtual space. As mentioned, I am here based in India. I say a small city outside of Mumbai, Pune, but it's about 6-7 million people. It's a small city in India. I am originally from the United States, and I've been in the intercultural business since around 2007, and really facilitating most of my core programs in the virtual space since around 2015, 2016. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm excited to get into our conversations.
Thank you so much. And there's still one person missing, we know that, who I'm going to open the doors for now. And we're going to invite now on the stage as well, Brett Parry, connecting from the US. Hi, Brett.
Hello, hello, hello. Yes, I'm going to be the thorn between the two roses. Sorry.
It's great to have you with us, Brett. And we are here. It's also nice because we're connecting not only from 3 different continents, we're connecting, of course, also from 3 different time zones in this case. Brett, let us know a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure, yes, I'm Brett Parry. I'm originally, as you will pretty much tell here from my accent, I'm originally from Sydney, Australia. I now live in another little small backwater called Chicago, so which is about double the size of the city I come from, and I enjoy being here. I've been here 20 years, and I do a lot of consulting with companies and individuals in doing business across many borders. And what I do really love is actual relocation training. It's something that I've really taken to specifically because I love that particular space. I've done it myself, and the virtual setting, of course, in this globally connected world, has been a great way to dive into that and be able to connect with people without relying on travel, even though, of course, in this space, one of the things I do miss is travel. I do like in person, but now we've actually obviously had to shift, and having the background of developing and being a little bit of a nerd and doing that in the first place, it's been kind of fun for me, but happy to talk about it. It's great.
Fantastic. And it's really fun because we have so many people. I see a lot of people from the US connecting, from India connecting as well. Many more people are joining us. It's really nice. So let's start the conversation because, Brett, you were already mentioning you're in the relocation field. And I just saw a very recent number that many expatriates are still staying in their host countries. So if I look back, I remember having a lot of emails from the Austrian embassy calling me back home, but I still stay here in Spain. So what is your experience and how were the expats dealing with this situation, being connected to you maybe virtually and to their family?
Absolutely. Some of those did take place. What I found surprising when I actually reached back out to a lot of my clients and trying to get a feeling for what the messaging was in some of these organizations. And it seemed to be, obviously, it has to be very specific. If somebody is actually concerned about their family's safety and health, then they are given that choice. But what I found is speaking to a very senior HR person is in their organization, it intrigued me that a lot of the people that were in these spaces were saying, you know what, no, the initial shock once that had finished was, well, maybe I'm okay here as long as I've still got the same safety protocols in place in my host country. I can stay here. And there's also the dynamics about feeling that they don't want to be looking like they're abandoning their team in their host country. They're just jumping out and they're going home to safety, right? And so there was a tendency, really, what I felt is that these were people that were already comfortable with ambiguity because of the experience of moving. So they just applied it to this particular situation. And yes, most people were kind of had the skills already. So that was surprising for me. And the more I asked, the more I found that was the case. I obviously got that from my government too. If you're Australian, you want to come home, that's fine. I'm going, well, I've lived in the US for 20 years. This is where my business is. I'm not sure I would do that. I mean, obviously, if you're backpacking and things like that, you might want to go home. But that's my situation, yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. Jill, what was your experience with your trainings, for example, that you're mainly doing in the Indian continent and beyond in that hemisphere? What is your experience? What's happened with virtual trainings or in-presence trainings as well?
Yeah, so as far as virtual training, virtual training and virtual facilitation and coaching has been going on and is very popular, I would say, across most of Asia. However, I know that there is, especially when we position a particular virtual training to groups which are really diverse, I will notice some hesitation from certain regions where there really is that preference for face-to-face communication. These are cultures which are more high context, cultures where investing in those early stages and building trust before getting into the kind of nitty-gritty of the job is really important. And so I did notice a lot of sort of hesitation, some pushback from some leaders, or okay, we'll go ahead and see how it works out, but we're weary. We're weary of whether or not we're going to be able to achieve the same objectives that we would in the face-to-face. So this is something that was there pre-pandemic. It was kind of like worst case scenario, we'll go into the virtual space if we have to, and we'll really try and push for that face-to-face. In terms of my story, I had been doing a lot of travel, a lot of face-to-face work, and I wanted to start a family. And so that actually grounded me for a period of time. And at that point, I decided I really wanted to increase the amount of virtual work I was doing. So with all of those clients, with that hesitation, I started to push and just try and build up more virtual work, offering even some free little mini webinars and things like that, just to show people, look at the amazing tools that are out there. Look at the amazing ways we can create engagement. There are so many different things that we can do to kind of create that same energy exchange that happens in the face-to-face. And luckily, my clients, we had a good relationship. There was a good foundation of trust there in terms of my facilitation, and I was able to convert a lot of them back in 2016, 2017, convert a lot of them into the virtual space. And from there, it was just, the word spreads, and India is a very deeply relationship-driven culture. So if someone has a good experience, it gets out. So the virtual sort of just grew from there. And then, boom, we wake up, Jan, Feb, with this current situation. So I was doing close to 65, 70% of work was fully virtual, and around 25, 30% or so was face-to-face. And so now that has just completely closed. Now it's 100% virtual. And those remaining clients that were still hesitant due to the current situation really had to jump in. And so far, I can honestly say that the experiences have been really positive. So people have come back and said, I couldn't believe that we were able to almost create a similar training experience in the virtual space, thanks to those tools and thanks to so much of the functionality that we have now.
Exactly. And we have a fantastic comment that exactly relates to what you were saying. So Anna Zano is telling us that in her experience, delivering workshops with high context and more relationship-oriented participants takes more time. What is your experience, Jill, in your context? And particularly what is happening in the virtual space? Because if I figure out my virtual trainings, my virtual classrooms, I usually plan 20 to 30% less, just because you don't manage the same content to go through it if you're online. What is your experience?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think about it all the time. What I've noticed in the last couple of years, and particularly paying close attention, more so now, again, because people are not in their normal work patterns, so there's additional stress. And what happens then is we really move back into our preferred comfort zones as far as our communication styles and things like that. So I've been more sensitive now. And the advice that I would give to a virtual facilitator, one is similar to yours. Don't try and shove too much content down people's throats. And the main reason is that you do need to be additionally patient. So I come from a low context culture where verbal communication is relatively self-initiative and on the spot. And in my workshops in other countries, you'll notice that you just have a little bit more silence. You may need to encourage questions a little more. Take that into the virtual space and double it. So the amount of silence you would have experienced in the face-to-face, allow that to, if you, for example, if I call on somebody and say, hey, Chung, what do you think about that? Be patient. Allow there to be a little bit of time, and let that person move forward with their comment or question. Also keeping in mind our language challenges, which is one of the brilliant things about the virtual space. I use Google Meet, and we have closed captionings. So as we speak, we can see the English closed captionings on the bottom. So sometimes people are reading, they're translating, and then they're responding. So to answer your question, if it's a high context culture with relationships, invest time in the initial beginning before with introductions. Don't move too quickly. Do a little bit of live action team building activities in the virtual session, and be very patient when it comes to the exchanges.
Thanks so much for mentioning the closed caption, because I really think that in the virtual platforms that offer the closed caption, and it works well as it does in Google Meet, for example, it's sort of a more inclusive environment if we think of it from a language perspective. Most of our workshops are in English, and sometimes particularly natives might be talking too fast, which is one of the challenges. So this is might create even a more inclusive environment. Let me pick up on one comment that I see here, and I think that's also something that you were mentioning, Jill, but I want to address Brett because we talked about that just recently. So Liliana is saying that once people experience the creative side of virtual tools, they in fact like it. And I think that's something that we just recently discussed, that very often what we are facing nowadays are those like one-to-many webinars, and we don't have a lot of interaction. And Jill was exactly saying that we need to create the interaction, but there are a lot of possibilities. So how do you do that when you're in the virtual space, Brett?
Well, I love playing around with tools. I'm a shiny penny type of guy, and and the more you go down that rabbit hole, the more you can find yourself in a mire of them. So, and understanding that even because I like it, I'm comfortable with it, that's not necessarily the same for my clients. And they have a different skill set, and they're usually a lot smarter than me in other areas, but at least I've got this, but not to assume the knowledge. It's like getting back to high context. The context of just assuming people know what you're talking about or what the tools you're using are is difficult to get over. So I just make sure that it's a tool that is actually accessible, like the one we're using now, where they actually do put the facility to be able to send to clients and give them the ability to try it out ahead of time, get themselves comfortable, get themselves technologically set up as far as sound and camera and things like that. That's important. And I just wanted to pick up on one thing that Jill says. I mean, in terms of the language, obviously I speak English as a native language, but my English is a lot different to American English. If I'm working with an American, and most of my clients that are even from other countries are usually more comfortable or more used to working with Americans. So my speech pattern changes, my speed changes. And also related to context is humor. I think I'm bloody hilarious, but the person that I'm working with who is not so used to my style of Australian humor, it will fall flat. And I'm a singer as well. I'm a performer. The virtual space is harder to gauge physical response and comfort with your style. So you have to really be, as Jill said, you have to really be cognizant and observant in facial features, which is obviously harder from other cultures and others. So I think it's a fascinating set of tools to be able to use, but you've got to be very careful about how you apply it.
Cool, thank you so much. And I was just wondering, because it's fun, because Mark was posting a comment to at least allow 6 seconds of silence. Everything else is too fast. And I think that's also nice because particularly in virtual trainings also, and I'm now addressing particularly you, Jill, because I know that sometimes you're connected with 2 devices or 2 connections even, because sometimes Wi-Fi or LAN stability, the internet stability is not that good. And I also, when I do online trainings, I try to totally slow down because sometimes we're not aware about bandwidth of our participants. And the same using silence, for example. But clearly we know that silence is also something that some of us, we don't deal that well with it. But Jill, let me ask you another question. I remember I was in one of your workshops, I think a year ago or something, and I just loved it because you even created interaction in a virtual space without using the so popular Zoom breakout sessions or whatever kind of breakout sessions you're using. You just used sort of a writing breakout. Would you like to tell us something about that and the way you managed that? Because I think it was a hilarious, and for me, and a super interesting experience to see that interaction can also be created without speaking or without camera even.
Sure, and it's funny you mentioned that because that was actually just like a hack to get around the fact that we didn't have breakout rooms in that technology. So that's the thing. It's, I think Brett and I are similar in that way. It's like when you do have a particular tool, even something as simple as a shared document, you start to play around with it and try and be creative and think about how you might utilize this. And there was a lot of trial and error initially. For example, the first time I ran it with a large group, I learned that only 10 people can be in the document at one time. And I was like, oh no. So, you know, but that's what you play around, you experiment. And I would also add here, not directly related to your question, but always, always, always have a backup. In the virtual space, you know, you can say quick coffee break, let's take 5 minutes to, sorry, in the face-to-face, there's a lot of things you can do if something doesn't go exactly according to plan. In the virtual space, it can just sort of pause that momentum that's getting created in the virtual classroom if something has maybe not worked out exactly the way. People are not getting access, people are getting frustrated because of the technology. So I have a backup plan and a backup for the backup plan to make sure that, you know, there's a ready activity or an alternative. But that particular hack was something as simple as creating a Google document, keeping in mind that you can draw on it, you can add pictures to it. I mean, it basically becomes a mural. It basically becomes almost like a whiteboard, almost a virtual whiteboard. And I can see some of the live comments that are related to this. Someone mentioned that they've observed, I think George Simons mentioned that they observed that they even see higher levels of interaction and engagement. And in that particular example with the sharing of Google Docs and getting people to comment along the side and add in their stuff, I see more equal levels of contribution from larger groups in that format than I ever did face-to-face. And not to mention the fact that we can screenshot it, we can save it, we can drop it into a drive, and they have access to it for, you know, however long I want to give it. And then those can be shared within the teams as well. So I just completed a virtual session with 4 groups, around 80 people who had all been divided into those 10, 10, 10. They all had their own documents. And at the end of the session, I made all the documents available to all the participants so they could go in and look at that. Which is something you would never be able to do with the same level of ease in a face-to-face session.
Absolutely, and that's really nice, because we have in virtual trainings we have a variety of tools that we can use and that we started to using every day more professionally, of course, and every day it works better, that we would not be able to use in presence trainings, or that we are just not using. But I also see that there is sort of a blending of the tools that we started using now online more, that are also sort of, they are entering the physical, the in-presence trainings. Let me pick up one question, because we were now talking that you were saying it's a more inclusive environment. You perceive it as a more inclusive environment if we, for example, are all writing in the same Google Doc, whether or not being on camera and somebody might be dominating the discussion, right? If I picked it up right, Jill.
Exactly.
So let me pick up here a question from Pascal, who is asking, how do you deal with participants who turn off their camera? And I do know, Jill, that you have a very strong opinion on that, right?
I do that for many reasons. It would be too long of a conversation as to why I really prefer the video. To answer your question, I always just insist that when you're speaking, you know, so if you're contributing something, to turn on the video. We know that so much of communication is nonverbal, and if you have a good video and you are, you know, got at least some decent light, etc., so much of that communication is happening through that visual. So I will make this part of, you know, that's with virtual, there's so much more preparation, at least in my opinion. And one of the key elements of preparation is making sure that your participants are prepared to accept that. So 5 minutes in, I will ask people to remove themselves from the group if they're not on video. But this is something that has been communicated at least 3 times separately before that session, so that they are prepared to do that. That being said, there are some elements of flexibility, again, with bandwidth, particularly in India, can sometimes be a challenge. So I'll ask people to turn on their video only if they're talking, or if people are calling in, there may be some exceptions made in very few cases. But this is how I address it. And to answer your question straightforward, if you make the expectation clear to the participants, you will find that most of the time they do adhere to that rule. And if they don't, you know, they're made an example of, and then that becomes the practice moving forward.
Exactly, and that's also many of the participants were commenting on that. And I also think, Brett, and let me ask you what you're doing, because I believe the preparation to learn or establish, maybe not to learn, but to establish an e-etiquette on what are we expecting in the virtual space or me in the virtual classroom is something super important. I remember doing a class, teaching a virtual class a month ago, more or less, and it was Saturday morning. I started at 9:30, and suddenly there was a student logging in, and he didn't realize that his camera switched on. He was still in bed, only half the body was covered. So it's like we need to establish, of course, also sort of an e-etiquette. What are you doing with your participants? What do you think is necessary? Because we know bandwidth is an issue, right?
Yeah, well, there are settings to say that the participant's camera comes on immediately, and I've actually got it switched off because I've had a similar situation as you, Barbara, with a couple that were fully dressed but still sitting in bed, right? Still sitting up in bed, and because it was evening for them, and that's understandable. There's an adage in show business that says you should never work with animals or children. One of the things that I do actually say, and I'm comfortable with, is that in this situation specifically, people might have children at home with them, and they're not at school, and they're not away from them. So if they're young children, I've become quite comfortable in clearly stating that up front and say, if your children are with you, that is fine. I'm comfortable with it. And a lot of people are like, really? Shouldn't I make some other, or shouldn't we do one for my husband and one for me, one session for me? No, just to give them the grace that this is a different situation, and say, I've worked a lot of times both in person and virtually with children present. We're going to have space for you to get up, feed them. If they start to get fussy and things like that, shorten the session. This is something that I want to make, and so having the camera on, they might be self-conscious about having the camera because they don't want you to know their children are there, but you're going to know anyway. So if you just give them as much comfort and flexibility as possible up front, again, it takes the level of stress out. They're more accessible to you as a participant, mentally and spiritually and physically, and so that just, I think, adds if you just get a lot of that communicated out front.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I see that children are okay, pets should be managed, would be one of the comments that we have from the audience. I have also seen many trainings or classrooms where pets are around. But if we just think about there is research done that pets, even in an office environment, might have a positive effect on the motivation of the employees. So maybe that's also something that we might just open up a little bit. I'm not sure. I'm just asking. Let me ask you one question. I had a lovely posting. I saw it a few weeks ago, and it was from a contact on LinkedIn, asking the question, who is leading the digital transformation of your organization? Is it the CFO, is it the CEO, or is it COVID-19? So we do, of course, see that there is a lot going on in the educational context, in the organizational context. Trainings are being changed, and I think, and we know that it will stick. So virtual trainings will stay. So the good news is, after the crisis, some things will be the same as before. As my colleague posted yesterday, the bad news is, after the crisis, some things will be the same as before. What do you think will be staying when it comes to virtual trainings, and where do you see virtual trainings or the virtual classroom evolving, Jill? What do you think is happening in this field?
This is a good question, and if you ask my personal opinion, I strongly believe that we were all headed in this direction inevitably, regardless of pandemics. So I think that this was just really a boost in that direction, and I say that with some not some hesitation, but I do understand that there has been pain felt by many in this transition, and it hasn't been easy for everyone. And I've also experienced Zoom fatigue, so I can understand that there's a lot of challenges with regard to that. But I personally feel that that's really where we were kind of headed as organizations. And I think there are so many advantages. If I can pull in your earlier comment about inclusivity and in creating inclusive spaces, just think about some of the, we have large percentage of the population. Take, for example, nursing mothers, where, you've got now this option of work from home where you may not feel the same amount of pressure from other colleagues, living and working and being involved with lots of women business groups here. There's still some stigma around who's pulling their weight, who's pulling their weight when they're working from home half the day or taking care of a child. Now that everyone's work from home is a different scenario. Take, for example, differently abled, maybe someone who is in a wheelchair now doesn't have to deal with the physical stress of traveling to the office. Living and working in India, many of us are aware of the fact that traffic is a major challenge. So the safety, the impact on the environment of so many factors, reducing your commute 4 hours to 4 minutes. So there are so many, I think, advantages that are being experienced by individuals, and those spaces are becoming even more inclusive in ways that we never ever expected. So I think that we'll continue in that direction. I mean, it's unfortunate that it's a pandemic and something which is so terrible, which has given that boost forward. But I do feel that we were always headed in that direction in some sense. And now we just have to really be there to support each other, to deal with the real challenges and try and maximize those advantages.
Yeah, and let me just pick on one thing that you were mentioning. I think it's interesting because I saw also a friend of mine, I was talking to her and she said, like, it was amazing. Yesterday I did a training for a company. It was only like 40 minutes or something, and it was 40 minutes. Preparation, 5 minutes, afterwards 5 minutes. If she were to do it in presence, it would be like 2 hours commuting, 1 hour waiting, setting up. So it's like half a day work, more or less. But I think, and that also brings me a little bit back to the history that we were experiencing, from a Zoom boom to a Zoom bomb to a Zoom fatigue, because I think most of us, we are not really, what are we doing with the time that we are freeing up? We are occupying the time we're freeing up with other things. And that's what I'm experiencing in terms of the virtual space. What do you do, Brett, for example, in order to have a consistent and on and off, a conscious, that's what I wanted to say, a conscious on and off, because we all seem to be on whatever platform it is quite all day, right?
And I suffered from that early on in this. I thought, well, great, I don't have to jump in my car or go to the airport. I've got all this other time I can spend doing training, and I suffered from that, and I realized that this is great. I love doing this, but there is a time when I need to break away from it. And I'm concerned even for my 10-year-old daughter, who has adapted quite well to the online space as far as her school is concerned. But I'm constantly going up, because she loves to learn and she loves to absorb knowledge, but I'm constantly going up and saying, Emily, get up, let's go outside, let's go for a walk, let's throw the ball around, let's play a bit of cricket, whatever it is. But just to bring a break to, I'm not as good at it as some people, but I'm learning from others in this space, sometimes virtually, with some coaching, to just learn to be present for my family and myself, and to break away from this space as much as I love living in it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I was just scrolling through the comments. Thank you so much, people. We have amazing comments and also a lot of questions that I'm not able to pull them up, all of them. But coming back to our discussion, the good and the bad about virtual trainings, and we gave sort of an outlook. I want to pick up one question with which one I think it is really like super important. It's how to create engagement, because I think that's the one thing that we have always been seeing, and it was very much criticized because all those online webinars or Zoom meetings very often are one too many. So how do we create engagement or involvement, Natalia is asking, in small virtual groups? And what would be some hints from 30 persons upwards, for example? And just to pick up on that, thanks a lot, Natalia, for asking. I think that, and that's also one of the realities that we are facing now, whether it's the virtual classroom or virtual virtual training or virtual team meetings, the bigger it gets, the more necessary is a co-facilitator, a co-trainer, a co-moderator. And in the educational university context, we had that discussion for many years. But what is the problem? There is one course, there is one professor. There won't be a second co-professor just because we go virtual. And that makes it quite tricky, because to create engagement, for example, and solve all the technical things at the same time, that's quite a thing. I'm sweating when I'm having groups that are over 40, for example, because that's sort of, I feel that's my size where it really gets very exhausting. I did have groups with 200 people, but of course, then it's one too many, and you only can create engagement a little bit through the breakout rooms. But picking up the question on Natalia. So my statement would be that it's always good to have a co-facilitator. And for me, 25, 30 would be like the size that I feel comfortable with, but always having a co-facilitator who also picks up and structures the discussion in the chat is super, super helpful. So asking also the participants directly, involving them from the very first moment on, is of course a way to engage them, to involve them, using surveys, using tools like Mentimeter, like Slido. But of course also it's kind of a long process until people really get engaged, my feeling. Jill and Brad, I'm going to give you a very last question, because we have planned a 43 minutes knowledge bite today. And I do see we are at 40 minutes. What do you use to create engagement, Jill, when you're online? What are your techniques? I do like, for example, to really address my participants directly. There are some trainers who just don't like that much, because it might be perceived even aggressive or a bit too forward.
So I think we could talk for 5-6 hours on this topic, and I'll try and be really brief. I think, again, it has a lot to do with setting expectations. So the communication comes beforehand, that I warn people in advance that, we will be referring to each other by name, and this is to create that engagement and get their buy-in right at the very beginning, and clarification for why you do that. I prefer not to have sessions over 20, 25 people. And one of the reasons is I always go and I look at who are the individuals. So I will look at, where are they, what is their level of experience, where are they calling in from? I'll even, do a little LinkedIn stalking and see, so that way when I get into the room, I feel like I already know them a little bit. Oh, they went to this university, or they have worked in this previous company. So that sort of familiarity that you can get as quickly as possible helps to create a space where then people are a little more comfortable to engage, especially if you're the only outsider, they're a team from within an organization that already knows each other. So that would be one of the strategies I use. And the last thing I'll quickly say is every 3 minutes, every 3 to 4 minutes in a virtual session, you need to do something. Have a poll, pose a question, respond in chat, draw on the whiteboard, whatever it may be. This is my strategy, and there are a variety of things to do. Perhaps we can take that in another session.
Definitely, we're going to pick up on that. That's also, let me just say, an outlook. These LinkedIn lives will be happening on a weekly basis, and we're going to pick up all kinds of topics around the virtual space. So of course, and let me just add what you were saying, Jill, and Liliana had a very good comment. Students can also become moderators, exactly. And that's a very, very good comment. So what are we going to do with these LinkedIn Lives? They're going to continue on a weekly basis, and it's going to be updated. You're going to be updated through the newsletter, so feel free to subscribe to that. Our virtual platform is online virtual space where there's much more content. And now the last question before we let you go into the Friday afternoon, the wonderful weekend. Brad, for you, what do you use to create engagement and interaction online?
It's just, again, I think Jill had a good point about doing that stalking. I mean, but it is knowing the audience, because you don't have them in front of you like you do in a live setting, where you can see somebody who might that you want to include, who might look like they are not included. So this is all preparation. This is just because virtual seems like it's easier and shorter, it doesn't mean, like, you could use, again, some of that space we thought about breaking away. we now got that space to actually do a little bit of research and do, take that level of care to the audience that you're going to be presenting to, and do them the honor of finding out about them as people beforehand, even if it is through a LinkedIn profile, because there's a lot of tools out there that can give you insights into who they are. Read through what people have recommended, what they like about that particular person, the recommendations and that other people have given them. So you can get a bit of a sense about what their communication style is, how confident they are in themselves, how maybe you might need to prompt them a little bit. So there's a lot. This is again, as you'll say, we could go on for this for hours. It's quite a fun topic. But I think one final thing I will say is that we also need to be cognizant in terms of how this will change the world in this setting, is that there was, even before this, just like there is in general society, a gap, a gap between the haves and the have-nots, and understanding that technological differentiation and gaps do exist. So we probably need, in this virtual space, to encourage governments and organizations to provide the tools for people that don't necessarily have the access to it, whether it be differently abled or whether it be socioeconomic levels of access. So just one little thing, another topic that could take a lot of time.
It's a very good point, because there was even there were a few articles about how the virtual classroom showed equal or provided an inclusive environment, but also many who showed that the digital divide and the digital gap is pretty big. And with this, I really want to thank the two of you again very much for being with me here today. It was a tremendous pleasure talking to you. To all of you out there who connected through LinkedIn and through Facebook, thank you so much for your valuable comments. We're going to provide a short summary of what was going on in this session. You're going to provide it with the recording on my webpage as well. And last but not least, I want to just make you aware of a beautiful conference that we are running the 26th of June, and you have a very short trailer about that. Thank you so much, Brett and Jill, for being with me, and enjoy the 1 minute of trailer about the Global Virtual Conference, about global virtual teams. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.